Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is May 14th. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Ohio State AD. He had some pretty aggressive words to talk about Michigan and their sign-stealing scandal from 2023. Then we'll get into my post-spring top 25. I went through, did the top 25. I'm going to do 25 through 11 in one segment, and then we'll get to the top 10 in the second segment of this portion. Definitely a tough thing to put together, a ton of teams that can go anywhere between 15 and 25, so it was definitely very, very tough, but then we'll jump into some QB battles. There's still a ton out there that we want to definitely keep our eye out on. I have four in particular that I want to watch very, very closely. Then we'll get into a transfer portal update at the very end of the show. Still some players out there that definitely are some big-time guys that could change teams for 2024. So definitely want to break those down at the very end. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, or you can just ask something either you're wondering about. You can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a kind of fun, interactive experience here, and I think it's fun for all of us. So let's jump right in, and let's talk about this Ohio State AD comments that were made on Central Ohio's NPR affiliate. He was talking about Michigan and the recent sign-stealing scandal and everything around that rivalry, really. And he basically said that all of the wins from a year ago should have an asterisk next to them. He said, of course they should, in fact. And I think that's something that a lot of people in college football, especially fans, tend to believe. He said, the rules are in place to protect the integrity of the game and try our best to create a level playing field. When the rules are violated, it affects those principles. We have to keep that in perspective. And that's a fair gripe, honestly. I mean, when you look at what happened last year with Connor Stallions and this huge sign-stealing scheme that was going on with Michigan, it definitely throws a cloud over what they did a year ago. I'm not here to say, they unequivocally did everything wrong or they unequivocally did everything right or anything in between, really. I'm just mainly saying I think this obviously does kind of lessen this a little bit, not necessarily ruin it by any means. Whenever you win a national title, go 15-0, do the things that Michigan did a year ago, it's not necessarily something you got to worry about too much, but it definitely does, to the rest of college football and the fans in particular, put a little bit of a cloud over this entire situation. Now, as for the sign-stealing scandal, there's still a lot to be uncovered. We'll still figure out a lot of the details. From where I was sitting, it felt like a competitive advantage was gained throughout that time, but at the end of the day, they continued to win after Connor Stallions was off the staff. Now, I do still have some questions about what his involvement was when he was on the staff, who he was fully in contact with and who he wasn't, and also what happened after he left the staff. Because if a guy like that, as we've heard the stories about Connor Stallions come out, absolutely loves Michigan football to no end, I'm not sure he would necessarily stop if he was just out of the building. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that I would love answers to. I don't necessarily think that anything has come out as of right now that makes me think that there was this huge advantage gained. Now, I do think there was somewhat of an advantage gained over the last couple of years, but I also think when you look at Michigan a year ago, that's just a really good football team. I think no matter how you cut it, that's a really good football team, and they definitely, benefited from this type of thing, but I'm not necessarily as ready to say as some other people are that last year essentially meant nothing because of this scandal. But getting into kind of all of this kind of sparked something in me yesterday, and it's something that I've kind of want to touch on here for quite some time, and it's just rivalries in college football and the energy we put around them. Gene Smith is a great example of this. This is an awesome thing to do, and I understand that it's a little bit petty, it's a little bit, childish, but that's what it's all about, right? You got to be throwing shots at your opponents and your rivals especially anytime you can get the chance, right? You got to be going after him. You got to be saying stuff like this, and especially if it was something like this that happened at Michigan, you got to come after him pretty aggressively. And Gene Smith, especially with him handing the keys off to Ross Bjork in July, he's got nothing to lose. He's just kind of hanging out, continuing to have one of the best athletic departments in the entire country, as he has pretty much since he showed up in Columbus. But it's one of those things that we need more of that energy. We just do. We saw it last year with Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day. There is a little bit of aggression between those two, being born on third base, with Jim Harbaugh saying that about Ryan Day, and Ryan Day following up suit and talking about all the sign stealing and everything like that. That is the perfect energy for all of these games. That is the energy we absolutely need. I hope Sharon Moore is as in on that as Jim Harbaugh was, because he did not shy away from talking bad about Ohio State by any means, and no one should. I think that's the overarching thing that I want to say here is college football, one of the great things about it is the rivalries. In my opinion, it might be the best thing about college football is the rivalries and the waking up next to someone, your neighbor is a fan of the other team that you're playing today, and you guys have a fun wager on the game. It's just little things like that make this sport so special. And the best part about that is it doesn't just happen on the football field in the fall, right? These teams aren't just battling for, 4 hours on a Saturday in September. They're battling year round, whether that's through recruiting or whether that's stuff like this, just taking shots at each other at different times, or a number of different things, portal recruiting. All of this stuff makes you rivals from, 365 days a year. And I think it's something that kind of is going to become more and more in the forefront of this sport, because as you move over to the SEC with Texas and OU joining, you add the Texas and A&M rivalry back. I think you're going to get a ton out of things like Oklahoma and Tennessee and Oklahoma and LSU. I think they're going to go at it. Also, Oklahoma-Missouri is a totally different discussion. That one's going to be as aggressive as any of them. But I think you're going to get some of these rivalries not only back with Texas and A&M, but also some new ones that are going to pop up. And I want that hate back, that unadulterated hate that I felt like has kind of waned just a little bit over the last couple of years, where it feels like coaches are just a little bit too chummy with each other, a little bit too friendly in the pregame, the players, trading jerseys after the game. I don't love that. I want these guys to hate each other 365 days a year. Now, I don't want them to go out there and, be too aggressive and hurt anyone or do anything like that. But you do want that energy. You do want that hatred to a certain extent. And I think the perfect example was there was an interview recently with Steve Sarkisian. He was asked about the A&M rivalry coming back, and he was asked specifically, a lot of the kids that, are in the program right now either grew up a little bit after the heyday of that rivalry and don't really fully understand it, and obviously came into Texas well after that rivalry was a thing. So he was basically asked, how do you get that energy for the game that some of these kids don't necessarily consider as big of a rivalry as others? How do you get that hate in those guys' heart? And Sark said, it's not hard at all. We'll be ready. So it's just kind of that energy like, yeah, A&M's easy to hate. And that's the energy that Texas, the head coach of Texas, should have 365 days a year. It's the same thing with Mike Elko. I want him saying the same things about Texas and taking the little shots and being a little petty at times. I know it's a little childish, but it makes those games so much more fun. I think when you get on the field and you know that there's something more behind it than just winning a game or maybe lifting a trophy at the end of it, there's literal hate between specific guys on each roster. It's incredible. You don't want these guys getting out and, getting a little too aggressive or getting too big for their britches by any means in this kind of world. But at the end of the day, I want a little bit more. I want a little bit more, Twitter beefs between these guys and a little bit more hate going back and forth. And once they step onto that field, them not just, want to go win a game to keep their playoff hopes alive, but want to go win a game because they want to just straight up beat the team in front of them. They want to batter them for 4 hours and walk out winning that game. All they need is that dub. They don't care about any of the outside stuff. They just want to beat the team because they hate the team in front of them. I think that's an incredible thing, and it's something that, players still take a good part in. You see that trash talk before games start and all that type of stuff, but I love seeing an AD do it. I got to be totally honest with you. I know they're supposed to be, the adults in the room and they hold higher positions and have to hold themselves to a higher standard, but get in the mud a little bit. Join the rest of us and get a little bit aggressive towards your counterparts. And I hope it's something that Ross Bjork keeps doing. I hope it's something that ADs around the country do a little bit more often, and other people, in positions where you have to be a little bit more diplomatic. Well, you don't got to be that diplomatic when you're talking about your rival, because all you're going to do is gain brownie points with the fan base. So I think it's going to be one of the fun things to watch, is just how all of these things develop over the next little bit. I think things are going to get a little bit more intense, right? You're fighting over spots that you used to not be able to fight for in the playoff, where a Penn State game against, Michigan State or whoever it is becomes that much more important, because you want to get into that dance, and maybe that'll generate a little bit more hate in these games and generate a little bit more energy, because I think we can all agree when people come out of the locker room, run out of the tunnel, and then they meet each other at half field, and you have to keep them apart, and then the game finally starts. It feels like there's just more juice to that. It feels like there's just more to that, and there's more energy behind those games, and that's what college football is about. That's what football is about in general. It is controlled aggression for 4 hours, and the best way to do that is to come in kind of with your hair on fire and then dial it back slowly. So hopefully, you never want any injuries. You never want people going out there trying to do anything aggressive, but you do want them going out there with a little bit of hate in their heart, a little bit of genuine hate in their heart for the people across the way, just because of the jersey they're wearing. So I want more of this. Huge shout out to Gene Smith for getting that energy out there, starting this early. And I hope when Ross Bjork takes over, he is definitely about this, because that's what college football is all about. Just that little pettiness between some teams, and definitely some aggression between those teams in particular. But we'll break down all of this as it happens. Hopefully we have some more stories about this type of thing. But we're going to take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about my post-spring top 25. We're going to do 25 through 11. And then we'll get to the top 10 in the following segment. But tons of teams that are right in that 15 to 25 mark that are really, really hard to order. But I did my best, and I felt like I got a pretty good list here. So definitely stick with us, and we'll break that down right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face, yeah. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows or 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Ohio State's AD's comments about Michigan and how their sign stealing scandal definitely adds a little bit of an asterisk to the wins they had a year ago, and how I love that energy. And it's something that we need more and more of in college football. So big fan of what Gene Smith said, big fan of more guys getting into that energy. But let's jump into my post-spring top 25. I have 25 through 11 in this segment, then we'll get to the top 10 in the following. But before we jump into that, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question at the top of the queue, get it on the screen, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCpodcast.net. Huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's fun for all of us. But let's jump right in here and let's talk about my 11 through 25. We're going to start at 25 and kind of work our way up to 11 just because I feel like that's the best way to go about this. But I kick it off with number 25, Virginia Tech, and this is just Kyron Drones. This is one of the best quarterbacks in the entire ACC, a dude that can flip that entire conference on its head this entire year. He can make that team a not only ACC contender, but then a playoff contender because that's the way of the world now. It's very likely that they walk into that Week 5 matchup against Miami undefeated, and Miami could as well if they can knock off a team like Florida at the beginning of the year. So all of this stuff is setting up for Virginia Tech to be in a position where if you're walking out of Week 5 undefeated, that team gets really interesting. They're number one returning in production in the entire country. They barely beat out Washington for this list. That was one of the teams I was fighting between. I just did it because of the quarterback stability there, where Washington's still kind of fighting a battle, which we'll actually get to a little bit later in the show. But NC State's right above them, so a little bit of run on some ACC teams here, and Grayson McCall coming in and having the receivers he's going to throw to, and Noah Rogers, Kevin Concepcion, Justin Jolie at the tight end position. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be one of the very, very cool things to watch throughout this year. Definitely need some playmakers to emerge on the defensive side of the ball, especially with Cam Riley, that very talented linebacker finding his way to FSU. So you're definitely going to need some guys to step up, but there's tons of talent on this team, and I expect them to be one of the most potent offenses in the entire ACC. And then we get to Kansas. This is just Jalen Daniels is one of the most under-talked about stars in college football. Every time I see this kid on the field, he does something that is absolutely jaw-dropping. He is a remarkable athlete, can throw the ball a lot better than people give him credit for, has struggled with injuries in the past, but when this kid is healthy, this team plays really, really high-level football. It's happened over the last couple of years where he came into the scene and people didn't necessarily expect a lot. He took over for Jason Bean, and they started 5-0, and everyone kind of lost their minds there for a second. It did kind of temper throughout the season with an injury to Jalen Daniels being involved, but this team will have a ton to say in the Big 12 race. The Big 12 race is going to be absolutely wild, as you can see with some of the names that are on this list. There's tons of people right around each other when it comes to the Big 12 right now. And then you have SMU out of the ACC, a new ACC team. This team is really, really good, and it all starts with Preston Stone. He's coming back, and that's absolutely huge for them. You know, there's a guy that I'm almost 100% sure that he got a couple of calls this offseason thinking, you know, you want to come play X at X university or Y university, and he decided to stay in Dallas. They do get Florida State in Week 5. They likely will be undefeated in that game. Now, they do have to overcome games at BYU and TCU, but both those games are winnable for this team. They are probably the better team in that game, so I'd lean for them. And then Florida State's got to come to Dallas to play, something they have not done in quite some time, especially in ACC play, have probably never done. So definitely will be an interesting game, and a game that could define the ACC in a lot of ways this upcoming season. Then you have Texas A&M. The talent is just out the door. I mean, you have so many guys in this room. It's still plentiful when you talk about the amount of guys they have, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Even when you lose all those guys, there's still so much talent there. You need Connor Wegman, obviously, to take that next step. I do believe he will do that. I think this wide receiver group is going to be really fun to watch. Noah Thomas is one of the more underrated guys in the country, in my opinion, and to be totally honest, with the talent they have on defense and Mike Elko calling the shots, I have very little worry about this defense, at the very least being formidable and causing some problems for some teams for sure. But then let's move on to Oklahoma State, number 4 in the country in returning production, and a lot of that is because of the running back they're bringing back in Ollie Gordon. He won the Doak Walker a year ago, just a guy that is an absolute beast. He can do so many different things in the run game, and also in the pass game can utilize him in different ways. The O-line will be one of the best in the country, and Mike Gundy just wins football games. So whenever the Big 12 comes around and people overlook Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy has no problem with that because he always ends up entering the bell. He did a year ago where a lot of people didn't even think they would be in the conversation to be in Arlington, and they found themselves right there with Texas. So I think this conference is going to be crazy. I think Oklahoma State's one of those teams that is flying a little bit too under the radar that is more than happy to be there. And then we get to Kansas State, another Big 12 team here. Avery Johnson is at the very top of my list when it comes to appointment television guys. And actually, that's a good top 10 Tuesday idea that I'll probably do next week. Dylan Edwards is actually not far down that list, to be totally honest with you. This team is set up to be absolutely in the thick of things for this conference. I think the offensive line is going to be really solid. I think the defense, you definitely need some guys to step up in big-time defensive roles, but also some depth roles and rotational running linebackers and corners and things of that nature. But Chris Kleiman makes things happen. There's a lot of times where you look at that roster and it's not necessarily what you would expect, and then they come out in the field and they play just incredible football. So I'm not necessarily super worried about that. I think they'll be able to put it together and rival Utah at the very top of that Big 12. Then you get to Florida State, a little bit lower than some people might expect on here, but when you look at Florida State, it all comes down to DJ Uiagalelei. I think we all understand that. But the reality is, DJ hasn't necessarily put together a season that makes you feel over the moon confident if you're a Florida State fan. Now, I think the ability is fantastic. We've seen it in spurts throughout his college career, but it's never been a consistent thing. And if you're going to compete for the ACC, especially in a year where there's, 5 different teams that are right below you or right above you, in Clemson's case, that are ready to kind of take that throne, it's going to be tough. It's going to be one of those things where he has to hit, and if he doesn't hit, it could look really ugly for Florida State. That being said, if he can put it together and, have the best season he's had in his college career, what most people do when they get around Mike Elko, Mike Norvell, I think he'll be more than fine. The defense is going to be incredible. You have Patrick Payton as one of the best edge rushers in the entire country. A lot riding on the portal group. They should be able to put it together, but I do have my questions about DJ Uiagalelei's ability to lead this team to where they want to go, which is an ACC title and a playoff. But then we get into Miami, a team that really has done incredible things throughout the spring. Cam Ward coming in is as big as it possibly gets. You have Xavier Restrepo, you have Jacoby George out there. Can Cam Ward execute at that very high level? Well, the ceiling's really high. I know that for a fact. The question is, can he get to that ceiling? If he does, I think they're a playoff team. They have one of the best O-lines in the entire country. Big-time portal additions with Simeon Barrow Jr. on the defensive line and Damian Martinez as probably one of the best running backs in the entire country coming over from Oregon State. So a ton going into this year, a ton being pushed into a little bit of an all-in year from Miami. So a lot is aligning in the right way. You need some things to fall your way, but Miami's building something, and it feels like they're ready to go full throttle and possibly win the ACC this upcoming year. Then we get to Oklahoma, a team that, in my mind, only really has 2 questions. I look at this roster, and it's really, really, really good, especially at skill positions. They have dudes across the field, but the 2 big questions are probably the 2 most important things when you're talking about winning in the SEC, and those are the lines of scrimmage. Neither of them look necessarily uber strong. The O-line is a little bit more worrisome than the D-line, but the D-line's not necessarily strong. You brought in Dominic Williams, which helps that a ton, but then you lost Jermaine Lole to Texas, so it got a little bit more sketchy. So I think it's one of those things where if those lines of scrimmage can put it together, and that's a rather big if as of right now, I think Jackson Arnold's going to be incredible. I think this team is capable of a lot of really big things. It's just you have 2 question marks that you do not want to have right now if you're Oklahoma. But let's move on to Clemson at 15. From my point of view, Clemson didn't get outright better from a year ago. There's nothing that I can straight up point to and say this is definitely a better team than a year ago. That being said, There's a lot of potential in that wide receiver room. Cade Klubnik could take that next step. Barrett Carter could become one of the best defensive players in the entire country. So things can start to, snowball for them and get moving in the right direction. But it is going to be a little bit tough. You do have some things that definitely are big time question marks. You lost some big time guys on the back end of that defense. The wide receiver group is still a big question mark, even though there is a big time potential in that room. So they are the team to beat in the ACC in my mind, just because that defense is going to be good, led by Barrett Carter, but it's very, very razor thin margins. They're not necessarily far above Miami or Florida State or even SMU, to be totally honest with you. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this unfold. I would say Clemson's up at the top right now, but it is very close over there in the ACC. Then we'll get to Tennessee. Nico Iamaleava is the unknown here, right? He's the one that you're a little bit worried about. But if he can meet the hype that Joe Milton was not able to reach in 2023, he's going to roll. He's going to be incredible. I think he's a much better player than Joe Milton from a just breaking down defensive standpoint, being more accurate, throwing, not only deep balls well, even though Joe Milton didn't do a great job of that last year. But in general, I think he's just a better quarterback, a better fit for Josh Heupel. The wide receiver group is awesome. Tons of guys that can make plays, like 5 different guys that I think will be big time feature guys in this offense. And then you have James Pierce Jr. on the defensive side of the ball, and that might just be all you need. With how dominant this guy is, he can do things that not a lot of people in the country can do. But let's move on to Arizona. Noah Fifita, heading into year two, has expectations out the roof. This dude definitely has a lot of eyes on him, a lot of people expecting a lot from him. And when you have Tatori McMillan by your side and you have that connection, it's going to go pretty well 9 times out of 10. So I expect him to have a great year. There could be, a little bit of a regression, a little bit of a sophomore slump, but nothing too bad, I don't think, by any means. Dwayne Akina at defensive coordinator for them, I think, is going to be able to put together a really good defense, bringing back a guy like Takario Davis from the portal, where you felt like you were going to lose him for quite some time. Getting him back is absolutely massive for them, and definitely a team that you could see in Arlington in December if they can put it together on that defensive side of the ball. And then you look at LSU. There are questions here. There's no two ways about that. Mainly on the defensive side of the ball, you worry about that D-line, but if you can put together a, okay defensive line, I think you can be really successful. It doesn't even have to be great, because I think this offense is going to be not necessarily as good as they were a year ago. That would be incredibly hard to pull off, but I think if you keep Garrett Nussmeier upright, he can pick apart pretty much any defense in the entire country. And he's going to be upright a lot, because this is the best offensive line in the country, in my opinion. The wide receiver group did lose 2 of the top, 4 guys in the draft this past draft cycle, but you have guys like Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, Adam Anderson, all very, very talented guys that can step into that role, along with Mason Taylor catching passes at tight end. So I think they'll be more than fine on the offensive side of the ball, but defense leaves a lot to be desired. And then you have Michigan. The main reason Michigan edged out LSU here is I know their defense is going to be at the very least top 25 in the country. I think it's going to be higher than that, to be totally honest with you. When you talk about the guys up front, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, it is an embarrassment of riches. It reminds me a lot of that duo they had over there at Texas last year, Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, where these guys are going to make it tough on every single team. And, some other things could be wrong with this team, whether it's, with Texas, it was the back end defense and losing guys over top. Maybe for Michigan, it's something like, tackling and doing things of that nature, or maybe getting to the quarterback in pass rush. Whatever that looks like, these guys are going to make that look a lot nicer and a lot more clean, because they're going to disrupt pretty much every single play. You add Will Johnson on the back end, and this defense is going to be really, really good. I have no doubts about that. Alex Orji coming in at quarterback is the big question, but I think that run game is going to be elite. I think the baseline is just really, really solid over there at Michigan, so I don't necessarily see them bottoming out too much. They definitely, will take a step back from a year ago, but I don't necessarily see them being, an 8-4, 7-5 team. I see them more as 9-3, 10-2, battling in pretty much every game they're in. So that gives you an idea of where I sit from 11 to 25. That was the tough part, to be totally honest with you, because formatting those teams, ordering those teams is not an easy thing to do, but we're going to get to the top 10 after this break, so stick with us and we will break down who I think is at the very, very top of college football going into this year right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We are getting into my post-spring top 25. We just did 25 through 11, but now it's time for the top 10. And I think this is a little bit tough to order, but I like this list, to be totally honest with you. I'm going to start with Missouri. This is a team that has a lot going for them. Obviously, a ton of momentum coming off a year that was probably one of the best years in Missouri football history, if I'm recalling correctly. But Eli Drinkwitz and the Tigers are fully ready to continue what they started in 2023, having Luther Burden, who I consider the best wide receiver and one of the best skill position players in the entire country. I think he does win the Biletnikoff at the end of the year, but we'll get to that later in the offseason. You also have guys like Mookie Cooper and Theo Weiss to kind of fill in the gaps in that pass game. Brady Cook is fully ready to go as one of the best quarterbacks, not only in the SEC, but in the entire country. The defense is a little bit of a worry for me. You lose someone like Blake Baker as the defensive coordinator, it's going to take a blow. You did bring in Corey Booten from South Alabama, who did an incredible job with that defense, learned under Kane Womack, so we'll kind of have that same type of energy, a lot of downhill, a lot of aggression from this defense coming down the road, which was kind of the way they played the last couple of years. But also losing guys like Tyron Hooper, Darius Robinson, Chris Abrams-Drain, Enos Rakestraw, all of those guys played massive parts in this team, and replacing those are not going to be easy. Now, they've set up a good infrastructure at Mizzou and have been recruiting at a really high level, so I'm sure they have guys that are ready to step up and into those positions, but definitely a huge opportunity for them to establish themselves, not only, for this couple of years, but going on in the next couple of years into the new SEC. Is a huge year for Missouri. I think they're fully ready to build off that momentum, but definitely a lot more pressure there than there was, 3 years ago or even a year ago, to be totally honest with you. And then let's get to Penn State. This is a team that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on, I've found. Drew Aller does need to take that next step if they're going to do what they want to do. I think that's period, end of story. That's no question. Andy Kotelnicki coming in from Kansas as the offensive coordinator, I think will help that a lot. We'll see how much that helps that, because he definitely does need to take a pretty marketable step. They did add Julian Fleming as a wide receiver from Ohio State, but did lose Keandre Lambert-Smith to Auburn. So a little bit of a give and take there. I would rather have Julian Fleming than Keandre Lambert-Smith, but also you need guys like Caden Saunders, Harrison Wallace to step up more and more into bigger roles, because losing someone like Keandre Lambert-Smith just makes that wide receiver room a little bit more of a question mark than it already was, which was already a pretty big one, to be totally fair. This defense is going to be good. I have very little doubt in that. I think they're going to be one of the better in the entire country. You have someone like Abdul Carter on the field, things tend to go pretty well for you. There's no doubt about that. I think he's someone that can straight up just win a game for them. They know that all too well with JT Tuimoloau coming into them, and absolutely just dismantling Penn State in 2022. I think that's something you might just see from Abdul Carter this upcoming year. Obviously, the biggest thing here is the coordinators, Tom Allen at DC and Andy Kotelnicki at offensive coordinator. They both have to hit. There's no two ways about that. But if they do, this team has tons of talent. James Franklin is a good head coach that can keep everyone in the same direction and keep everyone motivated. They have dudes. They just need them to step up into bigger roles. So definitely walking a little bit of a tightrope, but there's definitely tons of ability there. And if Penn State can particularly get the most out of Drew Aller, this becomes very, very interesting for the Nittany Lions very quickly. But then you have Notre Dame at 8 for me. Riley Leonard not being healthy throughout spring camp kind of makes it a little bit tougher to get a good beat on Notre Dame. But I know the defense is going to be absolutely nasty. You have Xavier Watts on the back end, one of the best safeties in college football. Riley Mills is ready to take that next step at the defensive tackle position. Benjamin Morrison is one of the best top nickel backs in the country. So there's skill and ability and force all over this defense. They're going to be playing really, really fast, playing with a lot of energy, and I think it's going to be one of those things where Riley Leonard is not going to be asked to do a ton for them to win games. It's kind of the same thing he did at Duke, where sometimes he had to get a little bit more dirty and take over games a little bit more aggressively. Now with some of the talent around him, especially at the running back position and the O-line, I think it gives him a little bit more of a leash. The wide receiver room is a little bit of a question mark. You do have Mitchell Evans at tight end, which helps that a little bit. Definitely some guys coming in. Chris Mitchell is a fantastic player from FIU. I think Jaden Greathouse is going to be a fantastic player for them. So I tend to believe they'll be okay at wide receiver, but it is still a question mark going in right now who that guy is going to be and then who's going to follow him up. And then you have Utah at 7. This is a team that I have gotten higher and higher on as the spring went on. I think this team has the ability to do some really remarkable things this year, but it's all tied to Cam Rising's health, as it has been for the past couple of years for Utah. He is the entirety of that team. When it comes to win total, if he's on the field, you have a very high win total. If he's not on the field, that slowly starts to drop week over week. Dorian Singer coming in from USC at the wide receiver position is huge. It feels like him and Cam Rising have a very good rapport at this point. You also have Money Parks in that wide receiver room. Brant Kuthi is one of the best tight ends in the country. The defense led by Teo Johnson is going to be really, really talented. So as long as you keep Cam Rising on the field, as long as you have him upright and healthy, you have a team that can win the Big 12 and not only do that, but be a team that gets a bye in the playoff, play a team that it's going to be a tough matchup, whether it's between, someone like Texas or Ole Miss or any team from one of those big time conferences is probably the one you're going to draw. But this team has the ability to compete with all those teams because of what they do on the defensive side of the ball and because of what Kyle Whittingham has built over there. So Utah is going to be fascinating to watch. As long as Cam Rising is on the field, they are the team to beat in the Big 12. But then let's move on to Ole Miss. This is a team that I think everyone is kind of, pushing that, they're going to win the SEC and they're going to go to the playoff and they're going to do X, Y, and Z. I think they're walking a little bit tighter of a tightrope than people realize. Not to say that they didn't do an incredible job of building out this team, and when you have someone like Jackson Dart leading the way as a third-year starter, a lot of that becomes a little bit easier. You have Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, and Caden Prieskorn in that pass game that are just going to be incredible this upcoming year, so it's a really embarrassment of riches when you come to those skill positions for Lane Kiffin. But the reality is when you bring in so many portal players, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which we'll get to here in a second, you're definitely walking a little bit of a tightrope. You have Walter Nolan, you have Princely Umanmielen, Chris Paul Jr., Cam Alexander, Trey Amos, among others. There are plenty more on that defensive side of the ball that are going to be absolutely defining for them. Now, if they can put it together and have a really, really good defense, which it's a little bit easier when you have guys that are a little bit more ingrained and have a little bit more great football behind them than, some other portal classes out there. But at the end of the day, they are going to need those guys to hit. If they do hit, a national championship is absolutely on the table for this Ole Miss team. I just think it's a little bit more of a tightrope walk than some people might give it credit for. But then to the top 5, I do have Alabama as number 5. I think this is a team that a lot of people want to write off, right? You want the big bad bully of Nick Saban to be gone, but this team is going to be good. Jalen Milroe, I think, will take that next step forward. Kalen DeBoer will help with that a ton. He is starting to make those NFL-level passes that we didn't necessarily see a year ago. The O-line and run game is going to be among the best in the country, especially on the interior, with guys like Jaden Roberts and Tyler Booker, both incredibly talented guards. And then Parker Brailsford, who just has to get to practice, has missed a lot of that spring practice, but seems like he will be on campus and likely be the starter at center there. And then you have defense leading by guys, Malachi Moore, Deontay Lawson, Jahad Campbell, among others. I think they'll be more than fine. The back end is a big question mark, but tons of big-time transfers that have come in that have helped that a lot. Then you look at Oregon at number 4. This team is absolutely loaded. They are out of this world good. And one of the big questions I had going into this offseason was, what does the interior defensive line look like going into next year? They got Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon, so I'm not necessarily worried about that. Jamari Caldwell coming over from Houston, Derek Harmon coming over from Michigan State, both just remarkably talented guys, and now puts everything in order where you have the twos where they should be and you have the ones up top where they should be, and just it all makes a little bit more sense in that defensive line room right now up in Eugene. Obviously, replacing Bo Nix is tough, but you got Dylan Gabriel in the portal, and then you added Dante Moore on just for good measure. So I think that's more than fine. I think the quarterback position this year actually is probably in a better position than it was a year ago, at least from a grand perspective. The O-line is going to be really good. The defense is relying on some big-time transfers to hit at different positions, Kobe Savage being one of the big-time ones. But at the end of the day, they should be more than ready to go. A lot of those transfer portal guys are guys that have, all Big 12 or all SEC or whatever behind their name. So no worries there, I don't think. They can walk into the Big 12 and just kick down the door and take over pretty much from year one. It'll be fascinating to watch if they can pull that off. Then we get to the top 3, and I start off with Texas here. The team lost a ton of wide receivers, and that was the big worry going into the offseason. But when you replace them with Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, and Matthew Golden, I think you're going to be okay. All experienced, productive receivers. And then you have Quinn Ewers pressing the buttons in year 3. It's going to be a thing of beauty. There's so many guys that can hurt you on this team. I didn't even get to guys like Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore and Ryan Niblett that absolutely will be a part of this team. You have Gunnar Helm in the tight end room, and then Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter in the backfield behind a elite O-line, maybe the second best O-line in the country behind LSU. So it's going to be an awesome team. The interior defensive line will be talked about a lot, but when you add someone like Jermaine Lole and Bill Norton in the portal, I don't think they're worrying too much over there in Austin. The back end is a little bit of a work in progress, but I think they'll be more than fine. I think they have enough dudes to fill the roles. Adding Javion Cole was absolutely huge, but I think they'll be ready to go and kind of are in the same position that Oregon is in, where you can walk into a really tough conference and take over from year one. And then the top 2, where pretty much everyone has them. Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3, or Georgia at 1, excuse me. Ohio State, the only roster that rivals Georgia in the entire country. Frankly, there's an argument to be made that it is a better roster than Georgia's. Will Howard has everything that Kyle McCord didn't a year ago. He is accurate. He is consistent. He is going to do the things that you need him to do. Him running the ball is going to be huge for this team. I think he's going to be able to execute at a really, really high level. They're going to have a great rushing attack with those 2 running backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins in the backfield. The defense has some big-time transfers coming in, Caleb Downs the main among them, but also more returners that are just absolutely huge. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, someone we talked about earlier in the show, are going to be incredible. They're going to make it impossible for some QBs pretty much all year. And then you have Georgia up top at number 1. This team is absolutely insane. Truly just out of this world. One of the things that everyone could hang their hat on when you played UGA was, if you can take Brock Bowers out of the game, if you can take Ladd McConkey out of the game, you have a shot to stop this offense. That's not going to be the case in 2024. They have about 7 guys in that wide receiver room that can make plays. put that alongside the tight end room that's one of the best in the country, in my opinion, a running back room that's among the best in the country, O-line among the best in the country, the same thing that we've heard with around UGA for quite some time. The back end of that defense and maybe interior defensive line, although if Kirby's not worried about that, then I'm not worried about that, frankly. But the back end of that defense does have some question marks, but Daniel Harris, I think, is going to be a great player for them. I think Ellis Robinson Jr. is going to step up in his freshman year, so I think they'll be more than fine, especially with that elite coaching they have. Some of those problems will be fixed, no problem. So it's going to be wild. I think this top 25 is one of the harder things that I had to put together, to be totally honest with you, because ordering these teams, especially when you're so far from seeing them played, is a little bit tough. But I felt pretty good about that. I'm sure there will be people in the comments that don't feel quite as good about that. But at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty good list, and it'll be fascinating to watch how this kind of adapts throughout the year. But we're going to take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the QB battles around the country. There are still 4 in particular that I want to zero in on. There will be a couple more down the road, I think, but I want to zero in on 4 with USC, Ohio State, Washington, and Nebraska. So we'll get back right after this and talk all about that. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just did my post-spring top 25. Was not the easiest practice in the world, but definitely felt pretty good about my top 25. But let's jump into some QB battles that are still raging out there in the college football world. There were a ton going into spring camp. There are a lot less now. South Carolina was figured out. It's going to be Lenora Sellers over there. We'd had a couple more guys lock up their starting positions, but there's still a bunch of big-time ones to watch, and I'll start with USC. It's Miller Moss against Jaden Maiava, and a lot of people will tell you it's Miller Moss's job, but what I watched throughout spring does not necessarily make me feel super confident that it is. That being said, Miller Moss is the leader going into fall camp. He is the guy that, knows the playbook a little bit better, had that incredible performance in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville, did incredible things throughout the offseason and all of this stuff. But when I was watching spring ball, and especially that spring game, Jaden Maiava was the better player, and it wasn't necessarily by huge margins. Neither of them had the greatest day, but at the end of the day, Jaden Maiava was the better player, so he's made up ground in that time. Can he make up enough ground to be the starter in week 1? I don't necessarily know, but I do know that one of the great equalizers when you have this kind of battle between two guys is who can make stuff happen with his legs, who can make stuff happen kind of off schedule. That would be more Jaden Maiava than Miller Moss. He has that ability to extend plays, make plays with his legs, and do certain things that Miller Moss just kind of can't, is more of a pocket passer than Jaden Maiava is. That being said, Miller Moss is a fantastic player. I think he can be successful enough to win games for them, to keep this job, to continue down the path, but there are a couple of games that could make him look over his shoulder pretty aggressively. If he gets to a Michigan game or to a Penn State game and it doesn't necessarily go the way he wants, he throws a couple of picks, he makes a couple of bad mistakes, there's a guy right there that is ready to play, that can absolutely help you and maybe not put you in as much trouble, being able to get out of the pocket, get 5 yards with his legs and live to see another down instead of having to throw the ball down the field or maybe making a bad decision because you can't do that with your legs. So, excuse me. This is one I'm going to be watching very closely when fall camp comes around. I think it's likely that Miller Moss will be the starter for week 1. I feel fairly confident in that, but Jaden Maiava is not going to give him a lot of leeway, and they play LSU to start the year, so if Miller Moss puts up a stinker, especially against that defense, things could get interesting fairly quickly over there at USC. And then let's move on to Ohio State, and let's talk about Will Howard versus Devin Brown. This is one that it's probably Will Howard's to lose, if we're being totally honest. Devin Brown's a great player, but honestly, if he was going to take the job, he would have taken it by now. I think he's been there for long enough. He knows the playbook. Will Howard was coming in kind of blind a little bit, and if he was going to, plant his flag, assert his dominance in this position, I think it would have been obvious by now, and it is not obvious. In fact, I think Will Howard probably had the better spring. So I think Will Howard's going to be the guy. I think especially with what he can do with his legs, it's kind of the same thing we were talking about with Jaden Mayava and Miller Moss. Devin Brown, a little bit more of a pocket passer, doesn't necessarily have that ability to create with his legs quite as much as Will Howard does, and the read options with these running backs are going to be a huge asset for this team. It keeps everyone on their toes. Make sure that Will Howard is comfortable in this offense because it's something he did a ton at Kansas State. So I expect Will Howard to likely win out on this one. The thing about that is he's going to have no leash. What we saw last year cannot happen again at Ohio State. We cannot have, bad quarterback play from Kyle McCord. They cannot have losing to Michigan, especially. Again, that cannot happen. So the leash is not going to be long, and especially when you have Devin Brown right there who understands the offense, might not be the most dynamic player in the world, but can, execute this thing and make it, at least move forward. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting conversation. And then, just for fun, you have Julian Sayin sitting back there that a lot of people love, and if both of these guys fall on their face a little bit early on in the season, there will be some fans that are yelling for that one. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this. I think Will Howard will be plenty successful. I think he will keep the job. I think he will be the guy. And I think we might just look back on this and say that was not much of a battle, to be totally honest with you. But at the end of the day, there are some questions there, and there's still no definitive starting quarterback for week 1. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold, not only in fall camp, but well into the season, see how Will Howard is doing and see just how long that leash is. But then let's get to Washington, and let's talk about Will Rogers and Damon Williams Jr., because this is one that was entirely under the radar to me. I kind of just penciled in Will Rogers as the starter for Washington, didn't even give it a second thought. But Damon Williams Jr. put in a remarkable spring. In fact, Jed Fish said it was the best spring he's seen from a freshman quarterback. And when we talk about Jed Fish, we saw it a year ago. Jaden DeLauro started the season, and then Noah Fafita came in. That could be what we're looking at, where you start the guy that has more reps under his belt and has a better grasp of just college football as a whole. And then he starts to struggle a little bit, and you look around and you say, maybe this season is not necessarily going the way we thought. Maybe they've lost a couple of games by now or something like that. And you start looking towards, the next year. Or you're in a position where he's holding you back a little bit, but you're still winning games. And you really want to get that next level like they did at Arizona a year ago. You bring in Damon Williams Jr., maybe you can hit that next level. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this. Jed Fish is not someone that shies away from making that tough decision at quarterback. So I expect Will Rogers to be the starter in week 1. I don't expect him to be the starter in week 8, but that's something that we'll definitely unpack throughout the season. It'll be fascinating to watch how much that really factors into what Washington does this upcoming year. And then we have Nebraska. It's Dylan Raiola versus Heinrich Haarberg, and this one feels like the most slam dunk. It's got to be Raiola. There's almost no way. The way that it would have happened, to be totally honest with you, was if spring he just fell on his face. He just had nothing. He was not playing really good football. Heinrich Haarberg was playing, dominating him in spring practice. That was really the only reality where Dylan Raiola was not going to be the starter here. Well, Dylan Raiola won the spring. He was incredible in the spring game, was definitely the best quarterback that I saw in that spring game by a fairly comfortable margin. So I think Heinrich Haarberg is a fantastic safety net, kind of like Washington with Damon Williams Jr. I think you have the ability where if Dylan Raiola, if it gets to him a little bit, the freshman mistakes and all of this crazy stuff that he's going to be going up against, it could be that, you see Heinrich Haarberg start a game here and there throughout the season. But at the end of the day, I look at this kind of the way I look at Washington and maybe some other teams around the country where you have a young guy, you have an older guy. You know that Dylan Raiola is your starter in 2025. So if you've lost a couple of games, and even if he's struggling, I think it's more beneficial for you to keep him on the field, let him kind of do trial by fire, learn on the job, and then you roll into 2025 really confident in his abilities. So I think this one will be interesting. I'd be a little bit surprised if we saw Harburg start a ton of games, barring any injuries, but I do think Raiola will be the guy. I think he'll make some freshman mistakes, but at the end of the day, I think he'll be the guy throughout the year just because this is probably the year before the year for Nebraska, and you want to set yourself up for 2025, and the best way to do that is to have Dylan Raiola on the field. So it'll be fascinating to watch that. There are a couple of more that I think will pop up in fall camp. We had Jeff Sims just commit to Arizona State, so that one could get a little bit more interesting. So tons of stuff to watch throughout the spring. Mike Wright is going to Northwestern, definitely one to watch there. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of these unfold. We'll probably revisit these throughout the offseason, probably closer to fall camp to give you guys an idea of where they stand. But for the time being, we're going to take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the transfer portal, give you guys a little bit of an update where everything is at, a little more than 2 weeks after it's closed, but definitely some big time commits and some bigger players still on the board that we definitely want to get to. So stick with us and we will be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the QB battles that are still out there to be decided. We had USC, Ohio State, Nebraska, and Washington, but there are a couple more out there that we will definitely get to throughout the offseason. But let's jump into a little bit of a transfer portal update. There have been a couple of commitments that I want to get to, but then a lot of intel about some big-time guys that I definitely want to jump into later on. But let's start with the commits, and let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Malik McClain has committed to Arizona State. This was a wide receiver that transferred out of Penn State, one of that three that kind of transferred out at the very last moment. You had Kenny Dillingham in Arizona State kind of going on a little late portal run here. They added Alton McCaskill at running back, Jeff Sims at quarterback, and now McClain at wide receiver. So definitely helping out that team that got hurt a little bit throughout this process, especially in the winter portal. So definitely want to see them kind of land on their feet. A very talented kid, never really caught on at Penn State, but definitely has tons of ability and can be a big-time player for Arizona State. Excuse me. And then you had Gino Vandemark. He was a O-lineman from Michigan State who has committed to Bama. This is something that I feel like Bama is just piling O-linemen in the portal, especially in those interior positions, because there's not a ton of depth, at least in the sense of, Bama depth as we've seen it in the past. So you definitely want to get some more bodies in there. He likely will not be the starter with guys like Tyler Booker and Jaden Roberts. But if one of those guys goes down, God forbid, you definitely have a very, very good option right there. He's kind of reuniting with the O-line coach over there, Greg Kaplovich. So definitely a very good fit and a very good player for Bama to pick up. They also picked up someone on defense. King Mack is a very, very talented safety that was in that portal class from Penn State with Malik McClain, one of those players that left. And from a talent perspective, this guy is going to be a big-time player for them. Now, I don't know how early he gets on the field. There are tons of guys at that position that are ready to kind of take that next step forward. Some young guys that are going to need to play big roles, Jalen Mbakwe probably being the main one of them. But you have tons of guys in that back room. I think King Mack could absolutely be one of the big-time players for them this upcoming year. And then you have Savion Riley, who is a safety over at Miami, coming over to Colorado. Definitely a big-time pickup for Colorado. Anytime they get a defensive player, to be totally honest with you, it's a big-time pickup because you just need more bodies in that room. You need to make sure that not only do you have the right 11, but you have the right 22 and the right 33, because those are the teams that go to the playoff. And if you recall, Dion promised a playoff, so that'll be very interesting to watch. But Jahad Carter is another safety from Ohio State that is now committed to NC State. This is kind of the same situation as Colorado, a little less dire than Colorado's situation on that back end, but NC State definitely needs some big-time playmakers on that defense and in that back end, and Jahad Carter was just in a room that it was going to be really hard for him to get on the field at the amount that he wanted. So I think he's going to play a huge part for the Wolfpack in 2024. Could be one of their better players on the back end of that defense and definitely make himself a little bit of money over the next couple of years. And then we get to Terrence Brooks, a corner from Texas. He is committed to Illinois, a huge pickup for Illinois. It was rumored that he might be going to Michigan or USC in the coming weeks. Well, Illinois was able to keep him on campus, and that's absolutely huge. Will likely be their cornerback one this upcoming year. Definitely did have a down year last year, had some mistakes on that Texas defense, but is a very talented kid that if he can hit that ceiling that when he came out of high school was, sky high, Illinois is going to have a really, really good player on their hands. And then you have Elijah Herring, one of the guys that had one of the weirdest recruitments of this entire cycle. He is finally committed. He is going to Memphis. This one was just all over the place. You had Kansas State and Colorado early on. Then you had Virginia Tech. Then you had Memphis. And absolutely huge pickup for the Tigers. This guy could be one of the best players in the entire AAC this upcoming year. An absolute tackle machine. Led Tennessee in tackles a year ago. So definitely is an immediate starter, an immediate playmaker, and someone that you could see on that first team, all AAC team at the end of the year. So definitely very, very talented kid, a huge pickup for a team that absolutely needs that help on that back end. But now let's look at the players that are still out there and some of the players that you need to be watching fairly closely. General Booty, to my knowledge, has not found a place to play. I know Iowa was reaching out to him, but a lot of it is on the defensive side of the ball. Cormani McClain finally has a little bit of clarity around his recruitment. He is taking a visit to Florida, and it sounds like Florida is going to be the team. I would be very surprised if it changed paths again, but at the end of the day, who knows? It is a bit of a gamble. You had some worries with him coming out of Colorado and some of the things that happened while he was there. But when you're as good as Cormani McClain is, you're willing to take that risk a little bit if you're Florida. So I think this is a guy that, the ceiling is through the roof. Can he, put it all together, and set himself up for success in the future? That'll be a big question mark. But I think he has tons of ability and very excited to see him find a new place to play. Hopefully, get his feet set and play really, really good football for them. Jacoby Matthews is a safety that's incredibly talented. It looks like he is all Washington right now. Definitely would make a lot of sense for him. He would be an immediate starter, one of the best players on that entire defense and in the Big Ten. I think it makes a lot of sense. Washington absolutely needs this one. They need as many bodies on that defensive side of the ball as they possibly can get right now with some of the guys that left, especially someone like Jabbar Muhammad, who is a corner, a little bit different of a skill set, but need a leader on that back end of that defense, and Jacoby Matthews could absolutely be that guy. Khalil Jacobs is a linebacker out of South Alabama. This is a battle between the schools in Alabama, to my knowledge. It's Auburn and Alabama, but now Ole Miss is trying to get on the fight. It sounds like Khalil Jacobs might be visiting them soon. I thought it was going to be a slam dunk. He's going to Bama, no question, because that's where Kane Womack is, but maybe not. Ole Miss definitely will have a lot to say. I think Auburn is technically the leader in the clubhouse right now, so it'll be fascinating to watch that one unfold. You also have Tyler Barron. He's really hard to nail down right now, if I'm being totally honest, but it looks like Miami and USC are the teams kind of leading the way. Ole Miss is still in it, but has kind of faded a little bit over the last couple of weeks, so it'll be fascinating to watch that one unfold. I think both those teams, Miami and Ole Miss, need that one badly. So whoever wins that one would be absolutely a huge pickup for them and would likely get a starter at one of those edge rushing positions this upcoming year. And then you have Curtis Perry, a D lineman from Bama, very, very talented kid. He's making his visits around right now. Went to Virginia Tech, is slated to go to Louisville and Wisconsin over the next week. Indiana is also very much in on this kid. Kurt Zanetti is doing just incredible things with that Indiana group right now. He'll play a role for any one of these teams. Will likely be a starter for most of these teams on that defensive line. So definitely will be a huge pickup for all of those guys. We had Pete Nakos, who's one of the guys that, does not sleep when it comes to the portal, does incredible work on the portal over there at On3, but he put in a couple of predictions where some guys will end up. He had J.D. Rhyme, a Auburn DB, heading to Houston with a 70% confidence ranking. Michael Harrison Pilot, who's a very talented wide receiver, he has him going to Texas Tech, 60% confidence rating on that one. Definitely would be a great addition to a wide receiver group that we talked about yesterday is already a really talented group. If they can put it all together, Harrison Pilot makes that a little bit easier to do. Johnny Bowens is a D lineman from Oregon that's still out there. He has him going to Texas as a 50% confidence ranking. I would bet that he ends up somewhere else just because Texas just add Jermaine Lole from Oklahoma, but we'll see how that one goes. Definitely not something that Texas would turn their nose up at because depth at that position is something you always want. So it'll be interesting to watch that one unfold. And then another D lineman, Javier Scruggs, a Grand Valley State D lineman, very highly touted guy. Michigan is definitely very much in on this kid. But Pete Nakos picked LSU as the pick, and they definitely need it. He has a 60% confidence ranking on this one, so it'll be fascinating to watch if he ends up there. If anyone needs any specific player the most, I think it's LSU and Javier Scruggs. But then still tons of other guys out there. You have Elijah Badger and Zachary Franklin out there as great receivers. Andrew DePapi and Thomas Gore as defensive tackles, Tony Mitchell, Jaden Mangum, Jeremiah Hughes on the back end of that defense, Jalen Berger and Andrew Paul are still out there at running back, so really, really talented guys all over the place for the portal right now. Definitely guys you want to keep a track on. One other tidbit, we had Ajay Hall is walking on to UCF. UCF continues to add a ton of talent. This was a kid that was at Alabama, transferred to Texas, never really found his footing at either place, but finally has found a place where he can play. Is it preferred walk-on there? So hopefully he can, set his feet, get a little bit more comfortable, and play some really good football for them. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or X, TikTok, Instagram for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have so many people doing incredible work across every single sport. In fact, I got to hurry out of here a little bit because my guy Kenneth is coming up here in about 20 minutes on the YouTube page, so definitely check that out. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.